I never thought one moment could change everything. But when I opened that door, I saw something that shattered my entire world. It was supposed to be just another quiet evening. My husband was working late, like always. But what I walked in on that night, it made me question everything: my marriage, my loyalty, and my deepest desires. I always believed my marriage was built on trust, love, and stability. For 10 years, I had been the perfect wife, standing beside my husband, Ethan, through every challenge life threw at us. We had a beautiful home, a comfortable life, and from the outside, everything seemed picture perfect. But perfection is an illusion, and behind closed doors, the cracks had already begun to form. Ethan was a dedicated man, too dedicated. His career consumed him, leaving little room for anything else. Late nights at the office turned into weekends away, and soon I found myself living in a house that felt more like a museum than a home. We barely spoke, barely touched, and when we did, it felt like we were strangers occupying the same space rather than lovers sharing a life. I tried to ignore the loneliness, convincing myself that this was normal, that all marriages go through rough patches. But deep down, I yearned for something more, something I hadn't felt in years. Desire, passion, the warmth of being truly seen by someone. And then there was Ryan. Ryan had been in my life for years, Ethan's younger brother, always full of charm and an easy smile. He was nothing like Ethan. Where Ethan was calculated and rigid, Ryan was spontaneous and free-spirited. He had always been kind to me, always treated me like I mattered. But it wasn't until recently that I began to notice the way his eyes lingered just a second too long, the way his presence made my heart race in a way it hadn't in so long. I told myself it was harmless, a silly crush born from loneliness, but that night changed everything. That night, when I walked into the room and saw Ryan standing there, his expression unreadable, his presence filling the space in a way that left me breathless, I knew something had shifted, something dangerous. I should have turned away, I should have left. But I didn't. Because, in that moment, for the first time in years, I felt alive. And that terrified me. I tried to convince myself that nothing had changed, that the way Ryan and I interacted was the same as it had always been. But I wasn't fooling anyone, least of all myself. The way his eyes found mine across the room, how his fingers would brush against my arm when he passed me, how his voice softened whenever he spoke to me, it was different now, and I felt it. At first, I told myself it was just my imagination, that I was reading too much into things. But then, I started noticing other things, things that I couldn't ignore. Ryan had always been close to Ethan, but suddenly he was spending more time at our house than usual. He'd drop by unannounced, offering to help me with things around the house that didn't need fixing. He'd stay late, long after Ethan had gone to bed, sitting with me on the couch as we talked about everything and nothing. And then there were the moments that lingered. The way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, like he was seeing something he wasn't supposed to. The way his smile faltered when Ethan kissed me goodbye before leaving for work. The way my own breath hitched whenever he was close, as if my body was betraying me before my mind could even process what was happening. One evening, Ethan had just left for another late-night meeting. Ryan had come over, as he often did, claiming he was just stopping by to check in. We sat on the couch, a glass of wine in my hand, my nerves buzzing under my skin. "You seem different lately," Ryan said, his voice quiet, almost hesitant. I forced a smile. "Do I?" He studied me for a long moment before nodding. "Yeah, I don't know, you just seem distant, like something's on your mind." I let out a soft laugh, trying to brush it off. "Maybe I'm just tired." Ryan didn't look convinced. "Is it Ethan?" His question made my stomach twist. I wasn't sure how to answer it, because the truth was, yes, Ethan was part of it, but so was Ryan. I took a sip of my wine, my fingers tightening around the glass. "It's nothing," I lied. Ryan's gaze didn't waver. You know you can talk to me, right? That was the problem. I did know that, and that was dangerous. I nodded, forcing myself to look away, to pretend that my pulse wasn't racing just from the way he was looking at me. But the tension between us was growing, thickening the air until I could barely breathe. And I knew it was only a matter of time before something happened, something we couldn't take back. The more I tried to suppress it, the stronger it became. I told myself that Ryan was just being kind, that I was overthinking everything. But deep down, I knew the truth. I felt something when he was near, something I hadn't felt in years. And what scared me most, I wasn't sure I wanted it to stop. It started with the small things. The way he would sit just a little too close. The way our hands would accidentally brush against each other, neither of us pulling away as quickly as we should have. The way I caught him staring at me when he thought I wasn't looking, his gaze lingering on my lips, my hands, the curve of my neck. One evening, everything changed. Ethan was out of town for a business trip, another 3-day stretch of silence and empty rooms. I had grown used to it by now, had trained myself not to let it bother me. But this time, I wasn't alone. Ryan had come over to check on me, as he put it. We ordered takeout and sat on the couch, the television playing in the background, but neither of us were really watching it. I could feel it, the shift in the air, the weight of unspoken words pressing down on us. He reached for his drink at the same time I did, our fingers brushing together. I froze, so did he. But neither of us pulled away. Instead, he turned his hand over, his fingers slowly lacing through mine. My breath hitched, my heart hammering in my chest. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. I opened my mouth, but no words came, because I didn't want him to stop. He lifted his other hand, his fingers brushing against my cheek, gentle, hesitant, as if he was waiting for me to push him away. But I didn't. "Ryan," I whispered, my voice trembling. His gaze flickered to my lips, and in that moment I knew. I knew that if he kissed me, I wouldn't stop him. I knew that if he touched me, I would let him. Because for the first time in so long, I felt wanted. Slowly, carefully, he leaned in. My breath caught as his lips hovered just inches from mine, his warmth sending shivers down my spine. But at the last second, he hesitated. "This is wrong," he whispered. "You're married." I swallowed hard. I know. Then why does this feel so right? I had no answer for him, because it did feel right, more right than anything had in years. And then, before I could think, before I could stop myself, I closed the distance between us. The kiss was slow at first, hesitant, like we were testing the waters, waiting for the other to pull away. But when neither of us did, it deepened. His hands found my waist, pulling me closer as a quiet gasp escaped my lips. I should have stopped. I should have pushed him away. But instead, I let myself get lost in him. Because in that moment, Ryan wasn't just Ethan's brother. He was the person who made me feel alive again. I told myself it was just one kiss, that I could pretend it never happened. But pretending became impossible when it happened again, and again. Ryan and I had crossed a line, one that we both knew we couldn't take back, and yet neither of us stopped. The next few weeks were a blur of stolen glances, secret touches, and whispered words that made my pulse race. We were playing a dangerous game, and every moment alone together felt like we were walking a tightrope, teetering on the edge of something we couldn't control. Then, one night, the inevitable happened. Ethan was supposed to be out late for a business dinner. Ryan came over, like he always did. We sat in the dimly lit living room, the tension between us thick enough to suffocate. I knew what was coming before it even happened. He reached for me first, his fingers brushing along my arm, his touch sending a shiver down my spine. I can't stop thinking about you, he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. I swallowed hard, my breath shaky. I know. His hand moved to my cheek, his thumb tracing the curve of my jaw. I know this is wrong, he murmured, his forehead resting against mine. But tell me you don't feel it too. I couldn't. Because I did feel it. And that was all it took. His lips met mine, and this time there was no hesitation. No moment of doubt, only heat, only longing. We barely made it upstairs. The moment my back hit the bed, the weight of everything disappeared, the guilt, the fear, the consequences. All that existed was him, his hands, his lips, the way he made me feel like I was the only woman in the world. And then, the door slammed. I gasped, scrambling upright, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might burst. Ryan froze, his eyes wide with panic. And then I saw him. Ethan. Standing in the doorway. His face was unreadable at first, just blank. And then realization dawned. His eyes flicked between us, between my disheveled hair, Ryan's shirt hanging open, the way the sheets were tangled around us. My stomach dropped. Ethan, I started, my voice weak, desperate. But he held up a hand. Don't, he said, his voice eerily calm. That was somehow worse than if he had yelled. Ryan moved first, stepping forward, his hands raised in surrender. Ethan, listen. But Ethan's fist connected with his jaw before he could finish his sentence. Ryan staggered back, cursing under his breath as he wiped the blood from his lip. Ethan turned to me, his eyes cold. How long? I opened my mouth, but no words came out. How long? His voice was sharper this time. I couldn't lie, not now. A few weeks. His jaw clenched. A few weeks, he repeated, like he was trying to make sense of the words, like saying them out loud would somehow change the reality of the situation. I reached for him, desperate, tears burning in my eyes. Ethan, please let me explain. Explain? He let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Explain what exactly? That you've been sleeping with my brother behind my back. I flinched at the venom in his voice. Ryan stepped forward again. Ethan, don't do this. Shut up. The room was silent for a long moment, the weight of what had happened settling over us like a thick, suffocating fog. Then Ethan exhaled, shaking his head. I should have seen it, he murmured, almost to himself. The way you two looked at each other, the way you changed. I wiped at my tears, my whole body trembling. I never meant for this to happen. His gaze snapped back to mine, and for the first time I saw it, the heartbreak beneath the anger. But it did happen, he said quietly. I had no response to that. Because he was right. It had happened. And there was no undoing it. The silence that followed was suffocating. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't break anything. He just stood there, looking at me like I was someone he didn't recognize. And maybe I was. Ryan wiped the blood from his lip, his shoulders tense as he took a hesitant step toward Ethan. Look, Ethan's glare cut him off. You don't get to speak. His voice was dangerously low, controlled, but laced with betrayal. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears as I tried to steady my breath. Ethan, please. Please what? He turned to me, his expression unreadable. Please understand. Please forgive you. I swallowed hard. I never wanted to hurt you. He let out a bitter laugh. Well, congratulations, you did. The weight of his words hit me like a tidal wave. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, but he didn't leave. And part of me hated that, because the longer he stayed, the worse this became. Ethan raked a hand through his hair, his body vibrating with unspoken rage. You didn't even hesitate, did you? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. Because he was right. I hadn't hesitated. That was the worst part. The guilt crashed over me, drowning me in a storm of regret, but it was too late for that now. Ethan took a slow breath, his hands curling into fists at his sides. So what now? I hesitated, because I didn't know. I don't know. My voice was barely above a whisper. His jaw tightened. You do know. I shook my head, feeling the sting of tears burning behind my eyes. Ethan, He didn't let me finish. Pack your things. The words were like a punch to the gut. My throat tightened. Wait. I said pack your things, he repeated, his voice empty now. You're leaving. I felt my knees weaken beneath me. Ethan, please, can we just... There's nothing to talk about. His voice cracked slightly, but his expression stayed hard. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. Ryan finally spoke up, his voice firm. You don't have to do this like this, man. Ethan turned to him so quickly that Ryan actually took a step back. And you... His voice was a growl now. Get the hell out of my house before I do something we'll both regret. Ryan clenched his jaw but nodded, giving me one last unreadable look before walking past Ethan and disappearing down the hallway. I was alone with him now. Ethan exhaled shakily, rubbing a hand down his face. I can't even look at you right now. My heart clenched painfully. Ethan. He shook his head. Just go. Tears slipped down my cheeks as I forced myself to move, my legs heavy as I made my way upstairs. Every step felt like I was walking toward the end of my life. Because in a way, I was. The suitcase sat open on the bed, half filled with clothes I barely registered as I packed. My hands trembled, my mind racing, replaying every moment that had led to this. I had destroyed everything. I had lost Ethan. And I had no idea what came next. Ryan had texted me, asking if I was okay, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. He was part of this, but he wasn't the solution. He had been an escape, a way to feel something again after years of loneliness. But what we had done didn't erase the damage it left behind. By the time I carried my bags downstairs, Ethan was standing near the front door, his arms crossed over his chest. He wouldn't even look at me. I swallowed back the lump in my throat. Where do I go? His expression didn't change. That's not my problem anymore. The words hurt more than I expected. I wanted to tell him that I still loved him, that part of me wished I could take it all back. But there was no undoing this, no fixing it. I'm sorry, I whispered, tears brimming in my eyes. For the first time since he found out, his face softened just for a moment. But then he blinked and it was gone. I don't want your apology, he said. I just want you to leave. I nodded, unable to speak past the ache in my chest. As I stepped outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap. The world kept moving, indifferent to my brokenness. I sat in my car for a long time before finally driving away. It's been 6 months. 6 months since I left. 6 months since I shattered the life I had spent years building. Ethan filed for divorce almost immediately. I didn't fight him. What was there to fight for? Ryan tried to reach out, but whatever we had lost its spark the moment reality set in. We weren't some tragic love story. We were a mistake, a painful lesson in consequences. And now I'm just alone. I've spent so much time wondering why I did it. Was it the loneliness, the neglect, the desire to feel wanted again? Maybe it was all of it. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that moments of passion can destroy entire lives. Was it worth it? No. I lost a man who, despite his faults, didn't deserve to be betrayed. I lost myself in something reckless and selfish, and now I have to live with it. And that's the worst part. Because no matter how much time passes, I will always be the woman who made the worst mistake of her life. So what do you think? Was I selfish? Was it just loneliness or something deeper? I still don't know if I regret it more because of the consequences or because of the person I became. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more real-life stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. Trust me, you won't believe what's coming next.